The rain hammered against the reinforced glass windows of New Geneva Station as attorney Kim Tae-ho hunched over his desk in the late hours of the night. The artificial gravity made everything feel heavier than it should, including the weight of 20 years of guilt that had shaped his entire life. His small office overlooked the bustling spaceport, where cargo ships from dozens of worlds docked daily, their engines creating a constant hum that had become the soundtrack to his sleepless nights. Tae-ho's hands shook as he broke the seal on the classified case file that had taken him 3 months to obtain through legal channels. The holographic display flickered to life, casting an eerie blue glow across his tired face. There it was, his father's conviction record, a document he had avoided reading for 2 decades out of shame and anger. Kim Min-ho, convicted of high treason against the Galactic Confederation, sentenced to life imprisonment on Keth 9, the most brutal prison colony in the Outer Rim. The charges were severe, selling advanced human fusion technology to the Zelkari rebels who had been terrorizing trade routes for years. Technology that could power entire fleets and tip the balance of interstellar warfare. The case had destroyed their family. Tae-ho was only 12 when the Confederation security forces raided their home on Earth's lunar colony. He still remembered his mother's screams as they dragged his father away in energy shackles. The neighbors whispered for months afterward. Teachers looked at him with pity and suspicion. His mother, Lee Eun-ji, had worked 3 jobs just to keep them fed while dealing with the shame of being married to a traitor. Now, at 32, Tae-ho had built his career defending the innocent, driven by a desperate need to balance the scales. His father had supposedly tipped toward evil. Every case won was an attempt to wash away the stain of his family name. But as he scrolled through the evidence files, something felt wrong. The witness testimony came from Commander Zethkol, a Korthan military officer who claimed to have seen Min-ho meeting with rebel contacts at a cantina on Proxima Station. But the timestamps didn't match. According to Min-ho's travel records, he had been attending an engineering conference on Mars during the alleged meeting. The conference attendance was verified by 17 different sources, including security footage from the hotel where he stayed. Tae-ho's heart began racing as he dug deeper. The key piece of evidence was supposedly a data chip containing the stolen fusion blueprints found in Min-ho's personal workshop. But the forensic analysis was incomplete. The chain of custody had 3-hour gaps. Most disturbing of all, the defense attorney assigned to his father's case had filed only a basic plea, presenting no counter-evidence despite having access to these glaring inconsistencies. The sound of his office door sliding open startled him from his investigation. Park De-hai stepped inside, her security badge still glowing from working another late shift in the prosecutor's office. Her sharp eyes immediately noticed the scattered holographic documents floating around Tae-ho's desk. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, settling into the worn chair across from his desk. De-hai had been his friend since law school, one of the few people who knew about his father's conviction and never judged him for it. "Maybe I have," Tae-ho replied, his voice hoarse from hours of silent reading. "De-hai, what do you know about Judge Veltar?" Her expression darkened immediately. "That old Korthan bastard? He retired 5 years ago, but everyone in the prosecutor's office has stories. Why do you ask?" "He sentenced my father." De-hai leaned forward, her concern evident. "Tae-ho, you know you can't reopen that case. It's been 20 years. The appeals process is closed." "Look at this," he said, manipulating the holographic display to show her the timeline discrepancies. "My father couldn't have been at that meeting. The evidence placement is suspicious. And look here, 3 key witnesses were never called to testify, witnesses who could have provided him with an alibi." As De-hai examined the files, Tae-ho continued his explanation. His father had been a brilliant fusion engineer working for Stellar Dynamics Corporation, one of humanity's most prestigious tech companies. He had security clearance and access to advanced blueprints, yes, but he was also known for his ethical standards and loyalty to human colonies. "There's something else," Tae-ho said, pulling up another document. "The Keth 9 prison medical records. My father died of what they called systemic organ failure after 6 years. But look at these injury reports filed in the months before his death. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, severe malnutrition. He was being tortured. Dahai's face went pale as she read the medical reports. The notorious prison colony was known for its harsh conditions, but what she was seeing suggested deliberate brutality targeted at human prisoners. "The worst part is," Taeho continued, his voice breaking slightly, "I spent my entire life believing he was guilty. I was angry with him for destroying our family. I never visited him in prison because I was ashamed. He died thinking his own son hated him." The weight of this revelation settled between them like a heavy blanket. Outside, a massive cargo vessel roared to life, its fusion engines casting brief shadows across the office walls as it departed for distant stars. Park Da-hai reached across the desk and placed her hand on Taeho's shoulder. "What did you find?" she asked softly, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Taeho looked up at his oldest friend, 20 years of suppressed doubt finally crystallizing into terrible certainty. "I think my father was innocent," he whispered, "and I think they knew it all along." The secure data terminal hummed quietly in the basement archives of the New Geneva Station courthouse, its quantum encryption arrays casting shifting patterns of light across the reinforced walls. Park Da-hai's fingers danced across the holographic interface as she bypassed layer after layer of security protocols. Her prosecutor's access codes opened doors that would normally take months of legal petitions to unlock. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered to Taeho, who stood watch by the entrance. "If they catch us accessing these files without authorization, we'll both lose our licenses." "My father lost his life," Taeho replied grimly. "I think that's worth the risk." The first search result made them both freeze. Judge Veltar's judicial record stretched back 25 years. But the pattern became clear once they applied. The right filters. Human defendants, 43 cases over 15 years. Average sentence 18 years imprisonment. Non-human defendants with identical charges. Average sentence of 3 years probation. "This can't be right," Da-hai muttered, running the search again. The results remained unchanged. A Zelkari smuggler caught with military-grade weapons received community service. A human caught with the same contraband got 25 years on a mining colony. A Corthan corporate executive who embezzled millions walked free with a fine. A human accountant who stole a few thousand credits to pay for his daughter's medical treatment died in a labor camp. The numbers painted a picture, so stark that Taeho felt physically sick. Every human who appeared before Judge Veltar faced maximum penalties, while other species received what amounted to gentle warnings. The discrimination wasn't subtle. It was systematic, brutal, and completely deliberate. "We need help," Da-hai said, her prosecutor's mind already thinking about what kind of evidence would hold up in court. "This is beyond what we can analyze alone." That's when Taeho remembered Lee Hana. They had met during a cybercrime case 6 months earlier, and her reputation as a forensic data analyst was legendary among the legal community. She could make computers reveal secrets their programmers never intended to hide. More importantly, she was human, and she had her own reasons to distrust the Confederation's justice system. Hana's laboratory occupied an entire floor of the civilian sector, filled with quantum computers and holographic displays that made the courthouse terminals look like ancient relics. She greeted them with coffee and concern, her enhanced cybernetic implants glowing softly as she processed the data they brought her. "Give me 3 hours," she said, connecting their files to her analysis systems. "If there's a pattern here, my algorithms will find it." While they waited, Taeho and Da-hai explored more of Veltar's cases. Each file told the same story. Humans facing impossible odds in a courtroom where the judge had already decided their fate. The defense attorneys, assigned to these cases, seemed to go through the motions without any real effort. Most filed only basic appeals that were quickly denied. "Look at this one," Da-hai said, highlighting a case from 8 years ago. Song Kaite, convicted of industrial espionage. Same charges as the Dralian executive tried 2 months later. The Dralian got probation and kept his job. Song died in prison after 3 years. When Hana's analysis was complete, the results were devastating. Her computers had traced the stolen fusion technology from Taeho's father's case back to its real source. The theft had occurred from Stellar Dynamics Corporation's secure server, but not by Kim Min-ho. The digital fingerprints led to a completely different person, Zekhan, a Korthan businessman who served on multiple corporate boards. "Your father never had access to this particular blueprint," Hana explained, manipulating the holographic evidence display. This was next-generation fusion technology, classified above his security level, but Zekhan had full access through his position on the Stellar Dynamics Board of Directors. The timing made perfect sense. Zekhan had downloaded the blueprints, sold them to the Zelkari rebels, then needed a scapegoat when Confederation security started investigating. Kim Min-ho was perfect, a human engineer with the technical knowledge to make the crime believable, but without the political connections to defend himself effectively. "Here's the really ugly part," Hana continued, bringing up financial records. "Zekhan and Judge Veltar are business partners. They own 3 asteroid mining operations together. Veltar made sure the investigation never looked in Zekhan's direction. The pieces fell into place like a collapsing building. Veltar hadn't just been prejudiced against humans, he had actively participated in framing them to protect his alien friends and business interests. Every human family destroyed by his court had been sacrificed to maintain his corrupt empire. This isn't just about your father," Dahai said, her voice shaking with anger as she stared at the evidence. "This is systematic persecution." Hana nodded grimly, pulling up more files. "Look at this. 43 families destroyed, hundreds of children who grew up believing their parents were criminals. And it's not just Veltar. I'm seeing similar patterns in 3 other sectors." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Human colonies throughout the Outer Rim had been systematically targeted by corrupt alien officials who used species prejudice as cover for their crimes. Families torn apart, lives destroyed, entire communities living under the shadow of manufactured shame. Tae-ho felt the weight of generational trauma settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. His father's supposed shame had shaped his entire life, driving him to become a lawyer to somehow make amends for crimes that were never committed. How many other children had grown up carrying the same burden? How many had blamed themselves for their parents' fate? "My mother worked 3 jobs after they took him away," Tae-ho said quietly. "She died exhausted at 55, worn down by stress and shame. I became a lawyer because I thought I had to somehow balance the scales, but there were no scales to balance. There was just corruption and lies." Through the laboratory's massive windows, they could see the sprawling docks of New Geneva Station, where ships from hundreds of worlds conducted their business. Somewhere out there, Zekhan was probably making another deal, living free and wealthy, while the families he destroyed struggled with poverty and disgrace. But now they had proof. The question was whether the corrupt system would allow them to use it. The deep space communication array crackled with encrypted data streams as Lee Hana's quantum computers worked through the night, tracing financial transactions across dozens of star systems. What they discovered made the original conspiracy look small. Judge Veltar wasn't working alone. He was part of a network that stretched from the core worlds to the Outer Rim colonies. Tae-ho stared at the holographic display showing money flows between bank accounts on different planets. Prosecutor Hantek, a snake-like Scythian known for his theatrical courtroom performances, had been receiving regular payments from the same shell companies that funded Veltar's mining operations. Defense Coordinator Merville, a massive Thraxian with 4 arms and a reputation for incompetence, was also on the payroll. "They weren't just biased," Hana explained, her cybernetic implants glowing brighter as she processed the complex data. "They were running a protection racket. Rich aliens pay them to frame humans for their crimes. Poor humans get maximum sentences, while the real criminals walk free." The scope was breathtaking. Over the past 15 years, the trio had processed over 200 cases involving human defendants. Not a single human had received anything less than the maximum penalty. Meanwhile, non-humans charged with identical crimes consistently received probation, community service, or suspended sentences. Park Dae-hai discovered the paper trail that proved systematic fund embezzlement. Court fees, prisoner transport costs, and legal aid budgets were being skimmed to fund the conspirators' lavish lifestyles. Veltar owned a pleasure yacht that cost more than most colonies' annual budgets. Hantek had purchased an entire moon for his private hunting preserve. Merval maintained luxury apartments on 7 different worlds. They were stealing from the justice system to fund their corruption of the justice system, Dahai said bitterly. It's almost artistic in its evil. That's when the pushback started. Taeho's request for additional archive access was denied without explanation. When he appealed the decision, his law license was suddenly under review for questionable ethical practices. Anonymous messages began appearing on his personal communication device, warnings that grew more specific and threatening each day. "Drop your investigation or join your father in the ground," read one message that arrived during his morning coffee. Another showed surveillance footage of him entering Hana's laboratory with the caption, "We know where you go." The threats escalated when a security droid malfunctioned in the courthouse hallway, nearly crushing Taeho under its massive hydraulic arms. The incident was ruled accidental, but the timing was too convenient. Later that week, Dahai's apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen. The message was clear: they were being watched and the watchers wanted them to know it. But word of their investigation had already begun spreading through the human communities scattered across the galaxy. Secure communication networks that had developed during the early colonial days carried whispered conversations about the lawyer who was fighting back against systematic oppression. Choi Sung-min was the first to make contact. His wife, Dr. Choi, Mae, had been convicted of performing illegal genetic modifications on human colonists. She died in an alien prison after 2 years, but Sung-min never believed she was guilty. His wife had been trying to help colonists adapt to the harsh radiation on Kepler 442b, not conducting illegal experiments. "I have her research notes," Sung-min told Taeho during a clandestine meeting in an abandoned cargo bay. Everything she did was legal under colonial medical emergency protocols. But her defense attorney never presented any of it. He spent 15 minutes arguing her case. More families began coming forward, each with similar stories of inadequate legal representation and suspicious evidence. The Huang family had lost their father to a conviction for arms dealing, but the weapons were later found in the possession of a Korthan crime boss who received only a fine. The Yoon family's mother had been convicted of embezzling relief funds meant for disaster victims, while the Dralian official who actually stole the money was promoted to a higher position. So Young provided the most disturbing testimony. As a former guard at the Keth 9 prison colony, she had witnessed the systematic abuse of human prisoners. They were given smaller food rations, forced to work longer shifts in the dangerous mining tunnels, and subjected to disciplinary measures. That would be considered torture under any civilized legal system. The non-human prisoners lived in relative comfort, so Young explained during a secure video call from her new home on a distant agricultural world. But humans were treated like animals. The guards were told that humans were inherently violent and needed harsh treatment to control them. She provided video recordings smuggled out in her personal effects when she quit the prison service. The footage showed human prisoners being beaten for minor infractions, while alien prisoners guilty of serious crimes lounged in comfortable quarters. The discrimination was so blatant that even some of the alien guards had complained, only to be transferred or fired. As the evidence mounted, so did the number of families seeking justice. They gathered in secret meetings held in the lower levels of space stations, in abandoned mining facilities, and aboard independent cargo ships traveling between colonies. Each meeting brought new stories of corruption and new determination to fight back. "They want us to stay quiet," Taeho told a gathering of nearly 50 families in the cargo hold of a converted freighter. The ship's captain, Kang Hyun-soo, had offered the space after learning that his brother had been wrongly convicted 15 years earlier. "They want us to accept injustice as normal. They want us to believe that humans deserve worse treatment than other species." He looked around at the faces surrounding him. Parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents, families torn apart by manufactured crimes and corrupt courts. Some were wealthy colonists from the core worlds, others were working-class families from mining colonies, but they all shared the same pain and the same anger. "But that's not who we are as a species," Taeho continued. his voice growing stronger. Humans don't accept injustice quietly. We fight back, we adapt, we survive, and we make sure that our children never face the same corruption that destroyed our families. The ship's communications array suddenly lit up with incoming signals. Similar gatherings were taking place throughout human space as word spread through encrypted networks. The conspiracy had awakened something that its architects never anticipated, the collective fury of an entire species that refused to be victims anymore. Outside the cargo bay's viewing ports, the stars seemed brighter somehow, as if the universe itself was preparing for the storm that was coming. The supreme galactic quartz crystal spires rose like frozen lightning against the backdrop of Nexus Prime's twin suns. The massive structure floated in orbit above the capital world, its transparent walls offering a view of the entire galaxy's political heart. Ships from every member species crowded the approach vectors, their hulls gleaming with the insignia of news networks, legal organizations, and diplomatic missions. Getting the case heard had required every favor Tae-ho could call in, and several he couldn't afford. The Supreme Court typically handled only disputes between entire star systems or violations of the Galactic Constitution. Individual criminal cases rarely reached this level, but the evidence of systematic corruption had forced the Chief Justice's hand. The breakthrough came when Ambassador Chen Wu-jin, Earth's representative to the Galactic Senate, threw his political weight behind the petition. Chen had lost his own nephew to Veltar's corrupt court 8 years earlier, and the evidence Tae-ho presented finally explained why young Chen Dae-sung had died in prison for a crime everyone knew he couldn't have committed. This isn't just about legal corruption, Ambassador Chen declared during a fiery speech to the Senate. This is about whether humans will be treated as equal citizens or convenient scapegoats in this galaxy. The interstellar news networks picked up the story like wildfire spreading through dry grass. Human colonies throughout the galaxy organized protest rallies. On New Tokyo Station, 10,000 colonists held a candlelight vigil for the wrongly convicted. On Mars, the entire mining union went on strike until their employers agreed to review past legal cases involving human workers. Even non-human worlds began paying attention. The Centauri Free Trade Alliance issued a statement condemning judicial EDIS bias. The Vegan Collective offered to provide independent observers for the trial. Most surprisingly, several Korthan colonies publicly distanced themselves from Veltar's actions, with some calling for his citizenship to be revoked. The trial began on a Tuesday morning that felt like the entire galaxy was holding its breath. The courtroom was a massive spherical chamber, with transparent walls that made it seem like the proceedings were floating in space itself. Thousands of observers filled the viewing galleries, while billions more watched through holographic broadcasts across hundreds of worlds. Veltar entered the courtroom wearing traditional Korthan ceremonial robes, his four eyes scanning the crowd with undisguised contempt. His defense team consisted of the galaxy's most expensive lawyers, creatures from species that valued legal technicalities over justice. They immediately filed motions to dismiss the case, claiming the Supreme Court lacked jurisdiction over individual criminal matters. Chief Justice Kelnara, an ancient Etherian whose species had helped write the Galactic Constitution 3 centuries earlier, rejected every motion with growing impatience. Her translucent form shimmered with barely contained anger as she reviewed the evidence files. "This court has jurisdiction over any systematic violation of constitutional rights," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. "And the evidence suggests such violations occurred on a scale unprecedented in our legal history." Prosecutor Hantek and Defense Coordinator Merval sat at separate defendant tables, their earlier arrogance replaced by obvious fear. Hantek's scales had turned a sickly grey color, while Merval's forearms trembled as he struggled to manipulate his legal tablet. Tae-ho's opening statement was simple and devastating. He presented the statistical analysis, showing the impossible pattern of human convictions versus non-human acquittals. He showed the financial records proving systematic embezzlement. Most importantly, he presented Lee Hana's forensic analysis of the fusion technology theft that had destroyed his father. "For 20 years I believed my father was a traitor," Tae-ho told the packed courtroom. "I lived with that shame, let it drive every decision in my life. But Kim Min-ho was innocent. He was framed by these defendants to protect their real criminal partner, Zekhan. Hana's testimony was the moment that broke the case wide open. Her holographic displays showed the digital fingerprints embedded in the stolen technology files. Every byte of data was tagged with biometric signatures that couldn't be faked or altered. The fusion blueprints bore Zekhan's genetic markers, his retinal patterns, his unique neural signatures from the cybernetic implants all Korthan executives used to interface with computer systems. Kim Min-ho never accessed these files, Hana explained to the silent courtroom. His security clearance was too low, but Zekhan downloaded them 17 times over a 6-month period, copying them to portable storage devices that were later found in Zelkari rebel bases. The defense tried to discredit Hana's analysis, bringing in their own technical experts to claim the evidence was fabricated. But under cross-examination, their experts admitted they had no explanation for how Kim Min-ho could have accessed files beyond his security level, or why his biometric signatures were nowhere to be found on the stolen data. Veltar finally took the stand in his own defense, a decision his lawyers clearly opposed. His testimony was a disaster from the first question. When asked about the statistical impossibility of his sentencing patterns, he claimed humans were naturally predisposed to criminal behavior. They are a violent, unstable species, Veltar declared, his multiple eyes glaring at the human observers in the gallery. They require firm judicial guidance to prevent them from corrupting civilized society. My sentences reflected the danger they pose to galactic peace. The courtroom erupted in angry shouts from the human observers. Chief Justice Kelnara had to activate the chamber's force fields to maintain order. But Veltar's words had been broadcast across the galaxy, and the reaction was immediate. Human colonies began declaring independence from sectors under Korthan administration. Trade routes operated by human merchants shut down completely. Even human-operated stations in neutral space began refusing docking privileges to Korthan vessels. The evidence phase of the trial lasted 3 weeks, with witness after witness testifying about the systematic persecution they had suffered. Families who had lost loved ones to false convictions shared their stories. Former prison guards provided testimony about the brutal conditions in alien-operated detention facilities. Financial experts traced the money flows that had funded the corruption network. When it came time for closing statements, Taeho stood before the Supreme Court and spoke not just as a lawyer, but as a son seeking justice for his father and thousands of families like his own. My father spent his final years believing the galaxy saw him as a criminal, Taeho said, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. He died alone in a prison cell, convinced that his own son was ashamed of him. But the real criminals were those who perverted justice itself, who turned our courts into weapons of oppression and profit. The deliberations lasted only 6 hours. When Chief Justice Kelnara announced the verdict, her ancient voice carried the weight of constitutional authority that had kept the galaxy stable for centuries. Guilty on all charges, she declared. The defendants are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment under the same conditions they imposed on their innocent victims. The courtroom exploded in cheers that could be heard throughout the orbital station. Across the galaxy, human colonies, celebrated as news of the conviction, spread through interstellar communication networks. Justice had finally been served, but more importantly, a message had been sent that no species was above the law. As Veltar and his co-conspirators were led away in energy shackles, Taeho felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that had been there for 20 years. His father's name was finally clear. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom across Seoul's Memorial District when Taeho made his pilgrimage to his father's statue. The spring air carried the scent of new life, a stark contrast to the weight of memory that had brought him here. Earth's gravity felt different now, not the crushing burden it had been for 20 years, but something solid and reassuring beneath his feet. The memorial had been completely rebuilt after the Supreme Court. Verdict. Where once a small apologetic plaque had marked Kim Min-ho as a cautionary example, now stood a towering monument carved from Martian marble. The new inscription gleamed in golden letters that could be seen from across the park. Kim Min-ho, innocent man, loving father, victim of injustice. Around the base of the statue, fresh flowers appeared daily. Not just from family members, but from strangers whose lives had been touched by the case. Human colonists from distant worlds made pilgrimages to Earth just to pay their respects to the man who had become a symbol of wrongful persecution. Some left handwritten notes, sharing their own stories of injustice. Others simply stood in silence, finding comfort in knowing they were not alone. The Kim Min-ho Foundation for Judicial Reform had grown beyond anything Tai-ho had imagined possible. What started as a desperate search for his father's innocence had become the galaxy's most powerful advocate for legal equality. The Foundation's sleek headquarters occupied an entire floor of the Lunar City legal complex, its quantum computers processing hundreds of cases simultaneously. Lee Hanna had left her private practice to become the Foundation's chief forensic analyst. Her team of human and alien experts worked around the clock, using advanced algorithms to identify patterns of judicial bias across thousands of court systems. Their success rate was staggering. Over 200 wrongful convictions overturned in the first year alone, with compensation packages that had bankrupted several corrupt colonial administrations. The beautiful thing, Hana had explained during the Foundation's anniversary celebration, is that we're not just freeing innocent people, we're deterring future corruption. Every judge now knows that someone is watching their statistics. The Foundation's work had sparked broader reforms throughout galactic legal systems. The Confederation had established mandatory bias training for all judicial officials. Court proceedings were now recorded and analyzed by independent AI systems. That flagged statistical anomalies. Most importantly, a new interspecies legal aid society ensured that every defendant, regardless of species or economic status, received competent representation. Park Da-hai approached across the memorial plaza, her footsteps echoing off the polished stone pathways. She had been promoted to chief prosecutor for the Sol system after her role in exposing the conspiracy, but she still made time for their annual memorial visit. In her arms, she carried a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, the traditional Korean flower for honoring the dead. "Your father would be proud," she said, placing the flowers at the statue's base alongside dozens of others. "Not just of what you accomplished, but of who you became in the process." Tai-ho nodded, his eyes fixed on the statue's face. The sculptor had worked from old family photographs, capturing Kim Min-ho's gentle smile and kind eyes. It was exactly how Tai-ho remembered him from childhood, before the arrests and trials had stolen those memories away. Across the memorial park, human children played on anti-gravity swings and holographic slides, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. These children would grow up in a galaxy where their species was no longer automatically suspect, where human defendants could expect fair trials and equal treatment under galactic law. They would never know the fear that had haunted their parents. "Generation. I keep thinking about timing," Tai-ho said quietly. "If I had found that case file even 5 years earlier, maybe I could have cleared his name while he was still alive. Maybe he could have seen justice done." Da-hai shook her head. "You weren't ready 5 years earlier. The corruption network was still too powerful, the evidence too well hidden. It took everything coming together at exactly the right moment. Your skills as a lawyer, Hana's forensic expertise, the political climate after the Centauri trade wars, even the development of new quantum analysis techniques. Your father's sacrifice created the perfect storm that brought down a system of oppression." The memorial plaza began filling with other visitors as the afternoon progressed. Some were family members of the wrongly convicted, others were legal professionals who had been inspired by the case to fight corruption in their own jurisdictions. A group of young law students from Europa University approached the statue reverently, their professor explaining how the Kim Min-ho case had revolutionized galactic jurisprudence. "Justice delayed is justice denied," Tai-ho said quietly, repeating the words that had become the Foundation's motto. "But justice achieved, even posthumously, still matters." A transport shuttle roared overhead, carrying passengers to the orbital stations, where humans now served as judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys in courts that had once excluded them entirely. The sound reminded Tae-ho of all the changes that had rippled outward from his father's case, not just legal reforms, but cultural shifts that were transforming how different species interacted throughout the galaxy. The Kim Min-ho Foundation's latest project involved establishing legal clinics on frontier worlds where human colonists often faced discrimination from established alien populations. These clinics provided free representation and educated colonists about their rights under galactic law. They also worked with alien communities to build understanding and prevent the kind of prejudice that had enabled Veltar's corruption. As the twin suns began to set over Earth's skyline, casting long shadows across the Memorial Plaza, Tai-ho felt a sense of completion that had eluded him for decades. His father's name had been cleared. The corrupt officials who destroyed innocent families were serving life sentences in the same brutal prisons they had used to torture their victims. Most importantly, the systematic persecution of humans throughout the galaxy had been exposed and dismantled. "He knew, you know," Dahai said suddenly. "Your father. Even in that prison, even when everyone believed he was guilty, he knew that someday the truth would come out. That's what kept him going for those 6 years." Tae-ho looked at his oldest friend with surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" She smiled sadly and pulled out a worn piece of paper, a letter written in Kim Min-ho's careful handwriting. Im So-young found this among his personal effects when she was cleaning out his cell. She's been carrying it for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to give it to you. The letter was brief, but devastating in its love and faith. "My son, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. I know you must have hated me for bringing shame to our family, but I hope someday you will understand that some battles must be fought by the next generation. I am proud to be your father, and I know you will grow up to be a man who fights for justice. The truth always wins in the end, even when it takes longer than we hope." Tae-ho's hands trembled as he read his father's final words. 20 years of guilt and anger melted away, replaced by the love that had never really disappeared. Around him, the Memorial Plaza filled with the soft glow of evening lights, each one representing a life saved by the Foundation's work. The Foundation's work continued, ensuring that no human family would suffer the same fate as the Kims. Throughout the galaxy, Kim Min-ho's name became synonymous not with shame, but with the human refusal to accept injustice. His legacy lived on in every fair trial, every overturned conviction, and every child who would grow up free from the shadow of systematic oppression. The end.